His name was George McWhirter Fotheringay. Not the sort of name by any means to lead to any expectation of miracles. And he was a clerk at Gomshott's. He was greatly addicted to assertive argument, and it was while he was asserting the impossibility of miracles that he had his first intimation of his extraordinary powers. This particular argument was being held in the bar of the Long Dragon, and Toddy Beamish was conducting the opposition by a monotonous but effective "so you say," that drove Mr. Fotheringay to the very limit of his patience. "Looky here, Mr. Beamish," said Mr. Fotheringay. "Let us clearly understand what a miracle is. It's something contrariwise to the course of nature, done by the power of will. For instance, that lamp, in the natural course of nature, couldn't burn like that upside down, could it, Beamish?" "No," said Beamish reluctantly. "Very well," said Mr. Fotheringay. "Then here comes someone, as it might be me, and stands as it might be here, and says to that lamp, as I might do, collecting all my will, turn upside down without breaking and go on burning steady. And... hello?" It was enough to make anyone say, "Hello?" The impossible, the incredible, was visible to them all. The lamp hung inverted in the air, burning quietly with its flame pointing down. Mr. Fotheringay stood with an extended forefinger and the knitted brows of one expecting a catastrophic smash. For nearly 3 seconds the lamp remained still. A faint cry of mental distress came from Mr. Fotheringay. "I can't keep it up," he said, "any longer." He staggered back, and the inverted lamp suddenly flared, fell against the corner of the bar, bounced aside, smashed on the floor, and went out. The landlord was the first to speak, and his remark, shorn of needless excrescences, was to the effect that Fotheringay was a fool, and indeed everyone accused Fotheringay of a silly trick. He went home, flushed and heated. He watched the street lamps nervously as he passed. Alone in his little bedroom in Church Row, he grappled seriously with his memories of the occurrence, and asked, what on earth happened? He was sitting on the bed, repeating for the 17th time, "I didn't want the confounded thing to upset," when it occurred to him that at the precise moment he'd said the commanding words, he had inadvertently willed the thing he said. Though he felt he did a foolish thing, he pointed resolutely to his candle. "Be raised up," he said. In a second, the candle was raised. It hung in the air one giddy moment, and as Mr. Fotheringay gasped, fell with a smash on his toilet table. The subsequent meditations of Mr. Fotheringay were of a severe but confused description. The nature of his first experiences disinclined him from any further experiments except of the most cautious type. But he turned a glass of water pink and then green, and he created a snail, which he miraculously annihilated, and he got himself a miraculous new toothbrush. As he started to undress, he was struck with a brilliant idea. "Let me be in bed," he said, and found himself so. "Undressed," he stipulated, and finding the sheets cold, added hastily, "and in my nightshirt. No, in a nice soft woolen nightshirt." "Oh," he said with immense enjoyment. "And now let me be comfortably asleep." The next evening, after supper, he went out into the lane beyond the gasworks to rehearse a few miracles in private. He stuck his walking stick into the turf that edged the footpath and commanded the dry wood to blossom. The air was immediately full of the scent of roses. His satisfaction was ended by advancing footsteps. Afraid of a premature discovery of his powers, he addressed the blossoming walking stick hastily. "Go back." What he meant was change back, but of course he was confused. The stick retreated at a considerable velocity, and there came a cry of anger from the approaching person. "Who are you throwing brambles at, you fool?" cried a voice. It was Winch, one of the local constables. "Hello, it's you, is it? The gent that broke the lamp at the Long Dragon. And this is another of your silly conjuring tricks, is it? Now I tell you—" But Mr. Fotheringay never heard what Mr. Winch was going to tell him. A violent gust of irritation swept him into action. "Here," he said, "I've had enough of this, I have. I'll show you a silly conjuring trick, I will. Go to Hades. Go now." He was alone. Mr. Fotheringay performed no more miracles that night. He returned to his room, scared and very quiet. As he sat on the bed taking off his boots, he was struck by a happy thought and transferred the constable to San Francisco. The next day, Mr. Fotheringay heard two interesting items of news. Someone had planted a beautiful climbing rose against Mr. Gomshot's house in Lullaborough Road, and the river as far as Rawlings Mill was to be dragged for Constable Winch. On Sunday evening, Mr. Fotheringay went to chapel, and oddly enough, Mr. Maydig preached about things that are not lawful. Mr. Fotheringay decided to consult Mr. Maydig immediately after the service. Mr. Maydig, a lean, excitable man, conducted Mr. Fotheringay to the study of the manse and requested him to state his business. At first, Mr. Fotheringay was a little abashed and found some difficulty in opening the matter. At last, he asked Mr. Maydig his opinion of miracles. Mr. Maydig was still saying, "Well," in an extremely judicial tone, when Mr. Fotheringay interrupted. "Now, take that tobacco jar on the table, for instance. What I want to know is whether what I'm going to do with it is a miracle or not." He knitted his brows, pointed to the tobacco jar, and said, "Be a bowl of violets." The tobacco jar did as it was ordered. Mr. Maydig started violently. "How did you do that?" he asked. Mr. Fotheringay pulled his moustache. "Just hold it, and there you are. Is that a miracle, or is it black art, or what is it?" "It's a most extraordinary occurrence. Is that the only thing? Could you do other things besides that?" "Oh, Lord, yes," said Mr. Fotheringay. He proceeded to tell of his misadventure with Winch to an astonished Mr. Maydig. "Of course he's at San Francisco, but I don't see how he can understand what has happened. I dare say he keeps on starting off to come here. I'll send him back by a miracle every few hours. And of course, if he takes a ticket every time, it'll cost him a lot of money. You see, I'm in a deuce of a tangle." Mr. Maydig looked serious. "I see you are. It's practically an unlimited gift. Let us test your powers, if they really are all they seem to be." The small hours found Mr. Maydig and Mr. Fotheringay careering across the chilly market square under the still moon in a sort of ecstasy. They had reformed every drunkard in the parliamentary division, drained Flinders Swamp, improved the soil of One Tree Hill, and cured the vicar's wart. "The place," gasped Mr. Maydig, "won't be the same place tomorrow. How surprised and thankful everyone will be." And just at that moment the church clock struck 3. "I say," said Mr. Fotheringay, "I must be getting back. I've got to be at business at 8. Mr. Maydig gripped his arm suddenly. "My dear chap," he said, "there's no hurry. Look." He pointed to the moon. "Why not stop it?" Mr. Fotheringay looked at the moon. "That's a bit tall," he said after a pause. "Why not?" said Mr. Maydig. "Of course, it doesn't stop. You stop the rotation of the earth, you know. Time stops." Said Mr. Fotheringay. "Well," he sighed, "I'll try. Here." He buttoned up his jacket and addressed himself to the habitable globe. "Just stop rotating, will you?" Incontinently he was flying head over heels through the air at the rate of dozens of miles a minute. In spite of the innumerable circles he was describing per second, he thought and willed. "Let me come down safe and sound. Whatever else happens, let me come down safe and sound." He came down with a forcible bump in what appeared to be a mound of fresh-turned earth. A large mass of metal and masonry, extraordinarily like the clock tower in the middle of the market square, hit the earth near him, ricocheted over him, and flew into stonework, bricks, and masonry like a bursting bomb. Far and wide, nothing was visible but tumbled masses of earth and ruins. No trees, no houses, no familiar shapes. You see, when Mr. Fotheringay had arrested the rotation of the globe, he had made no stipulation concerning the trifling movables upon its surface. So the village, and Mr. Maydig, and Mr. Fotheringay, and everybody and everything had been jerked violently forward. much more violently than if they'd been fired out of a cannon. And every human being, every living creature, every house and every tree, all the world as we know it, had been so jerked and smashed and utterly destroyed. That was all. These things Mr. Fotheringay did not, of course, fully appreciate, but he perceived that his miracle had miscarried, and with that a great disgust of miracles came upon him. "Stop!" he cried. "For goodness sake, stop! Just a moment while I collect my thoughts." "I know," he said, "and for goodness sake, let's have it right this time. Now let nothing I'm going to order happen until I say off. Lord, I wish I'd thought of that before. Now then, here goes. The first thing is, when all I've got to say is done, let me lose my miraculous power. And the second is, let me be back just before the miracles begin. Let everything be just as it was before that blessed lamp turned up. Me back in the Long Dragon just before I drank my half-pint." He clenched his fists, closed his eyes, and said, "Off!" Everything became perfectly still. "So you say," said a voice. He opened his eyes. He was in the bar of the Long Dragon, arguing about miracles with Toddy Beamish. He had a vague sense of something forgotten. You see, his mind and his memory were just as they'd been before this story began, and among other things, of course, he still didn't believe in miracles. "I tell you that miracles, properly speaking, can't possibly happen," he said, "and I'm prepared to prove it up to the hilt." "That's what you think," said Toddy Beamish. "Prove it if you can."